We're keeping it local in today's episode as we have a very special guest who is from Winnipeg and the surrounding area, of course. One of the up and coming entrepreneurs in the city, Maddie Thompson, who is the founder of Mad Social Agency and has done tremendous work to shine a light not only on the city of Winnipeg, but also on the world of social media and its importance in today's society and business. So, Maddie, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
So we were chit-chatting a little bit before we started recording, and to turn back the clock, every entrepreneur has their own journey of the aha moment or remembering that one specific event. And you had worked previously, the only job you'd had was working at Dollarama, and you had a TikTok following that you tried to grow and were having fun with using social media. So what I want to know is, when was the moment where the thought in your mind crossed the threshold of this is for fun to I can actually make a business around this and I should take this more seriously?
Yeah, so even just my TikTok presence, I started it for fun. My brother and I were in Minneapolis for a vacation and we were bored. So that's why I started TikTok, and it kind of started out of a love for that. And then for a few years, I was known as the Winnipeg TikTok girl, which is really funny. I just kept posting Winnipeg content. And so through that presence on there, I worked at the Great Canadian Dollar Store in Niverville. It's the only job I've ever had. And my manager and everybody knew that I kind of did this TikTok thing for fun. So she asked me to run the Facebook and the Instagram for the Great Canadian Dollar Store. So I guess that was kind of my start. Previous to that, I learned social media marketing through a clothing brand I used to own. So I had some experience marketing products already, just from learning trial and error and then YouTube, and then through my own personal presence. So that kind of Great Canadian Dollar Store experience really, it taught me like the actual SMM process in a way, even though it wasn't like I sent it to them for approval. It wasn't like I did all this other stuff, but there was kind of a reason that they were kind of going to take advantage of the situation. So I was sick of it one day. I was on TikTok and I saw this other girl who did social media management for a living. And she was saying how she traveled and she did all these great things. And that day I started an Instagram page. I called it Spark Media back then. I literally went on Google and I searched up cool words and the word Spark came up. So then that's why I used Spark Media. I had to change my name later on. It's another story. So Spark Media began, and one day I posted some carousels, some random like social media tips. I followed everybody in the Niverville area because that's where, I grew up. So I know a lot of people here. It'd be easier to build a business. And a local DQ franchise owner that week reached out to me, wanted to basically hire me for social media management. She asked me for my rate. I said $80 a month, ridiculously low price. I don't think anybody does that. So of course she would take it. And I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. I had no like plan or template. I had no way of doing anything. I had no official contracts. I literally had no idea. I think I made the social media like calendar, like monthly, on a Canva document, and I sent it in a PDF version. Now we do this beautiful spreadsheet with strategy and everything. I did a PDF document with like images and captions. So it didn't like click at that moment of, okay, I'm going to start a business. That was more of, I just want to do this because it's really fun and the dollar store is fucking me over. So I started doing that, and it was a freelance job. I did 3 of their DQ accounts. So that was an extra, whatever 80 times 3 is. I can't do. Okay, there you go. Perfect. So I was making an extra $240 a month. And for me, being a university student at a dollar store, making maximum $600 a month, which just paid my expenses barely, that extra money was great because it was like, oh my gosh, that's like my gas, that's my university parking. For anyone at the U of M, they know that the U of M is ridiculous for their parking prices. So to me, that was a lot of money. And I was just having a blast with it, and I was learning, and I wasn't thinking like, oh, this is a business, So then fast forward a bit, October, November, December, So maybe like 6 months. It was in February, and I had a viral post. In that time, I got a couple more clients. It was nothing big. I think like my biggest client was $200 a month, super small, right? This was just side cash for me. February, I had a viral post. It had like 3 million impressions or something on Instagram, which on Instagram, that's very hard to get. This was back before reels were really like relevant. This was more in just like kind of carousels and doing all that. It was a pure static post about the Instagram algorithm, about how you should focus on saves and shares. And so through that one post, I got 5 clients that one week. I was now making double the amount all of a sudden than I was at my dollar store. So a month after that, I quit my dollar store job. So that was kind of the moment where I kept looking at my phone, and it was like notification after notification after notification. Holy shit, this is now that to me was, it clicked in my head. I need help from other people to run accounts. This is actually now a business. I feel like for me, it was that decision of kind of quitting my job, even though it was a part-time dollar store job, but it's still a big move. It's not like his full-time job, whatever. But that was a moment where I was like, holy shit, like I need to go full force into this. It's now a business.
That's when I hear a story like that, the first thing I think of is there's this kind of story arc that's really similar in a lot of entrepreneurs where they don't really believe in themselves fully yet, or they don't really think, oh, this is not going to work, or it's a throwaway. Oftentimes we're putting so much energy in harnessing and we're trying to do this, we're trying to do it. And it's like, I need to do this. This is going to blow up. I'm curating it perfectly. And then it falls flat. But then when you're just like, whatever, it's a throwaway. Who cares? You fall asleep, you wake up next thing like ding, 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 ding,
Yeah.
ding, ding. What was the first thought as to like, what was the first decision that you needed to make in order for you to put this fire out and be able to get this thing under control?
Hire my friends. That was the first thing I did because I couldn't take that much work, and I doubled my rates. So that was the first thing that I did because now it was a real business. I started paying subscription for softwares. I hired my friends. I kind of taught them how to do SMM, and I just figured out my actual systems. I think I built an actual business plan, and I did all that. But the real testament to that story, it just shows that nothing happens without action. And I think the issue within a lot of people and what we're taught is that you should plan, and then action. But people's actions are usually so meticulous and small because they want everything to be perfect and such high stakes. Where if you're starting something just to start based on passion, I wasn't trying to focus on making money. I wasn't even trying to focus on building a business. And look how well it's done. Because the amount of people I see who plan for a year, 2 years straight, and then they never actually go and execute, those are the businesses that never get fulfilled. So yeah, that was the first thing I did. That's when I started planning. That's a funny thing. Like I ran my business for 6 months with no plan. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. And then that viral post hit. Then I did the business plan. I hired 2 of my friends. I kind of built in a little bit of systems. Now I look back and I don't even know how I ran it back then with nothing compared to what I have now. But yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a phrase I read in a book recently about it's talking about entrepreneurship, and one of the things it says that successful or rich people do is ready, fire, aim.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take action before you feel like you're going to aim and try to make it perfect. And it's funny you're saying this because it's something that I've been talking about with friends, or that you have in your mind, and you're like, I feel like it's so much easier said than done. But that's the thing. Like, where do you think people get caught up in? What do you think is the main barrier that stops people from actually taking action versus creating this perfect plan and waiting for everything to work in their head before they actually execute?
I think that they treat it too much as it's their only, like, it's the only thing they can ever do. It's their baby. But, and I look at this like a content strategy a lot of the time. I get a lot of new clients, and they're so particular with what goes out. Maybe it's a new business owner, they're super particular with what goes out, but sometimes you just have to get everything out and get too much out and then narrow it down from there. So it's the same as kind of starting a business. You can't, too many people are just, they're picky on the details because they feel like in the big picture it'll matter, when really at the beginning it doesn't. Like, of course, you need to be detail oriented to some extent, but there is a huge asset to just going and just trusting yourself and doing and starting. And it's a better way to learn.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. I think that that's something that needs to be shared a lot more, is the fact that, okay, this is the example of a business that I hear of people talking about, like niching down versus when you're just starting. I was actually talking about this with my brother last week, where this idea of you need to niche down is hammered so hard. But I think where people get lost is thinking they need to niche down super specifically always from the beginning. Like, if you've never even got off the ground, like, then how can you
don't
build
know what you're going to be good at? Like, how do you know what you're going to be really good at off the ground? And I also look at it from my perspective of my team. If you niche down, and like, I do see value in niching down. I've worked with a lot of clients that niche down and make a shit ton of money. But as an agency, even specifically, if I niche down, then I have to hire team members that are really good at that niche too. And it's going to make that process exponentially harder. And also, team members get really bored if they're doing the same fucking thing over and over again. So what I think I do really well from a leadership perspective is we have such a wide range of clients. None of my team members ever get bored because they're always working in some sort of different industry and they're always learning something new. But niching down, yeah, you can do you can specialize, you can charge more. So I see benefits to both for sure. In the beginning, don't niche, because how would you know? How do you know what type of people you attract also? Maybe if you just have a super large audience, you will attract the type of person that you didn't even think that you would attract as a client. And then you can kind of narrow it in on that. That's my perspective on kind of how to work through that.
Well, I guess you can take the data points, and the ones that work, double down on it, and the ones that don't, discard it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I've figured that out slowly too. I've learned that I hate working with realtors. Like, I hate working with realtors. So that is one niche we do not really work with. I don't market myself to realtors anymore. I used to. I just don't touch them. So it's, for us, like, we're still trying to figure out our niche. It's a slow process. I find that my team loves running restaurants and coffee shop accounts, and accounts that we can actually go to the physical location and film and make content, other than having somebody who offers more of a service that may be harder to market, because then you're relying on the clients sending videos. And most of the time we get the clients who say they'll send us video and they never do. It's so common in our industry. So yeah, it's like, I'm 3 years in and I'm still figuring it out. So why would you niche down right away?
I mean, it's not to hammer any entrepreneurship cliches, but if the person listening is familiar with Alex Hormozy talking about, it's not about trying to win right out of the gate. It's trying to outlast everybody, because you're playing an infinite game. The goal of entrepreneurship is not to win and that's it, and you're the only social media marketing agency left standing. Yeah. It's like you are there 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree for sure.
So I am actually curious now. So why exactly do you not like working or shy away from working with realtors? Or what did you learn from that experience that made you decide to defer?
And okay, this may just be the specific I mean, I've actually worked with a large amount of realtors, and this is just common traits I've found between all them. It could also be because they were mainly Winnipeg realtors, and Winnipeg has a smaller market to make money and stuff. So this is just my perception. This isn't probably overall. They're always very cheap. They will always bargain on price. They're extremely, extremely picky, and they will never make the fucking videos that I ask them to do. And they just want the sold and listing posts that are so boring that nobody gives a shit about. And then they wonder why only realtors follow them. And then they wonder why their engagement is so low. And I say, because we're just posting a fucking graphic of the house that you sold, and not like you talking about world events and the market and the housing crisis. That's so much more interesting. I have a mortgage broker client who's awesome. His name is Vince Gaetano. On Instagram, he doesn't even talk about mortgages. He talks about like how dumb Trudeau is. He talks about like rate hikes and how it'll affect people. He talks about rental prices in Toronto. That's the type of client I want to work with, where every single realtor I've got, they are like, oh yeah, we'll send you house videos, blah, blah, blah. Never send us anything. So then we have to hit a post count per month, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to do that. So then we're doing like the quotes. Oh, your home is blah, 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 blah. And some realtors love that. And then they're like, why is this not getting any likes? So I think it's just because of the way that realtors that I've worked with, the way that they perceive social media, or they look at Selling Sunset. And I've had this a few times where they send me the Selling Sunset girls as examples of what they want their Instagram to be like. They send me the Selling Sunset girls. They're like, this is what I want my profile to look like. And so I'm like, okay, so you need professional videography then. We need to do a photo shoot. We need to like really build up a personal brand, and you need to do some trending videos and stuff. Oh, well, I don't want to do any of that. I'm too busy. XYZ, but I want my feed to look like that. So it's unrealistic expectations.
So what you're saying is I want to look shredded out of my mind like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to track anything I eat, and I'm not willing to do steroids if necessary in order for me to get the extra physique. But make it chop, make it snappy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly my experience with realtors. So,
well, maybe you should. I mean, the one thing I did want to say is like I can't necessarily blame them if they're always bargaining down on price, because their job is literally to do the opposite when it comes to selling homes. So they make it's the classic, like, people that can't do business dealing with people who will never give deals versus people who will never buy without a deal. So like,
yeah,
stop between a rock and a hard spot. But I mean, there's a lot of insight in that too. I think in that you learned. I think this is a concept I've become so familiar with in the last 6 months from changing careers and going through a whole whack of different experiences. Is most people don't really know what they don't want to do. They are so fixated on like, what do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? It's like, okay, why don't you figure out what you don't like doing first? Because if you just sit there on the rock, like Aristotle, trying to plan what you like, maybe you're not going to, like you said, you're not taking action. So then you're going to get to a scenario. And I see this often with like people our generation, they go through job to job to job and they're like, this is BS or blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, no, that's good because you learned you didn't like that. Is there not value in that?
And the sad thing is that's what we are taught when we're young. Like that's what's drilled into our head as we're young. It's like grade 9 that we start talking about university and careers, and you have to start thinking about it and make a decision. And they make it such this big deal that you have to like know kind of what you want to do. And nobody in school, my parents never said this either, nobody talks about figure out what you don't want to do. Nobody says go and try things, just go to school and take everything. And no, you have to go to school for something, then you have to do that job after and keep switching jobs. So many people complain, but it's like that's how we kind of were formulated to be. And the funny thing is that used to be my thought process too. I don't even know how I got out of that thought process at all. It just kind of happened.
So then you went to university though, didn't you?
Yes, I was in university for architecture, and then I dropped out a year and a half ago.
So what made you decide to go to university? And then what was the decision? Why did you make the decision to drop out?
So I went to university because it's what I was supposed to do. There was also pressure because my parents set aside money for it. right? Absolutely love that. That's a blessing. A lot of kids don't have that.
True, true,
But
true.
that's that added pressure of, okay, they put away this amount of money for university. You kind of have to go, right? So I chose architecture because, as you can already tell in this podcast, I can't do math. So I didn't even want to try to take calculus. So I went the architecture route, which is design, and then engineers do the math. Because I love design and I love building and I love hands-on things. And I did learn a lot of skills from that that have translated into what I do today. But even in class, I saw myself owning the architecture firm or owning the buildings. And so one of my goals in life is to be a real estate developer to some extent and own a bunch of properties. And like, I still liked school, but I had nothing else to do. You know, what was I going to do? Quit school and then just work at the dollar store, maybe try and find an internship somewhere with no degree, right? That's kind of difficult. So I think that the best route to go, which is the route that I went, is try and build something on the side when you're in school. Like that's a great way to do it as well. Or, you know, or just after high school, just go try everything. That's an even better route. But if you're kind of in the situation where I was in, then try and build something on the side. Because I built what I had on the side of architecture school, which anyone who knows that faculty, it's insane and people don't sleep. And I built that up to like an amount where I was making the salary of a nurse. So I was like, okay, maybe this is like, I can actually sustain myself just where I'm at now. What if I actually grow this like crazy and I can actually like hire multiple people? What if I doubled the amount of accounts I have? So I kind of took that chance. And, you know, you can always go back to school. That's the other part of it. School's not going away. Nobody at the University of Manitoba is going to be like, nope, U of M's closing down, no more school, no more degrees. Like nobody is going to do that. So you can always go back as long as you have the humility to be a 25-year-old starting up again in university, which that's not even that old. Like, you know, when I was young, I felt like you have to get it done as fast as possible. But even if you're 35 and going back to school, like, I don't think there's any problem with that.
I mean, my mom did. She literally took a break from going to university between 1991 and 2004, 13 years later, when she was 33 years old and had 3 kids, and finished the human ecology degree at 36 years old, and then worked
Yeah.
for 10 years and then retired. So it's like, you know, when you think about the path, the standard path that people take, I think this is one of the main things that I find is so interesting to talk about with people on this podcast, is the fact that like when you do go to school, there is that you have to follow this conventional path and it's very linear and you can never deviate, because if you do, then you're bad and shame on you, or you are a degenerate, or you are a fill in the blank with
Yeah.
whatever pejorative term you want. But I find it so fascinating that even though you had these experiences, you were still in that conditioned thinking of like, well, my parents, the pressure and going to school. And even though you knew it was probably against your better judgment, you still went and did it and gave it an honest effort. And even after the fact, the buffer of realizing, and I hear this too when people think of like moving away, because like I've lived in Toronto and I've lived in BC and I've lived in Alberta and I've lived in Saskatchewan. And every time when I move, people are like, man, or why don't you stay there? Or why did you move back to Winnipeg? It's like, well, you live where you need to, right? Like there's not like
Yeah.
if you move to another city and you come back, you're a failure. Like,
Yeah.
or if
No,
you
not at all.
try to start a business and you have to like go get a job again to make money, like you're not a failure. Like it's
People will always put that down though, because you're not taking the successful path in life. Like even my grandparents, they will see my cousin as more successful than me just because he wants to go to teaching school and become a teacher. And he'll probably have 3 kids and live in like a middle class, like nice house, but nothing too bad, but nothing too fancy. But no, Maddie dropping out of architecture school and making a shit ton of money and building a team and like not wanting kids and stuff, that's failure. Like that's not good. It's like it's an old mindset. That's the thing. And I was stuck in it still. I was never stuck in like I never wanted to live in the fucking suburbs. I never wanted kids. Like that stuff I've known forever. It was more about the traditional career path. I've always been super motivated. Like I had a podcast called The Tryhards because literally my friend and I, we try hard. We try too hard. And that's what I've always been known for. I've always gone 10x on everything. So I think that's like one reason why I kind of got out of that mindset. But yeah.
I like that you brought up the term try hard. That was something I remember I used to hear in high school so often. It's crazy to think that I graduated now going on 10 years ago in the new year. And I remember that people would like say to me or like to other people who like got good grades or whatever, like, oh, you're such a try hard. You're such a try hard.
It's
Why are you
like a
trying so hard?
negative thing. Like it's not negative. It's ridiculous.
I mean, all I can say about the people that said try hard are either, spending time doing drugs or lost their hair or both. So, I mean, not to say there's any direct correlation, but to be honest, like it's, I don't know if you're a sports fan, but do you know who Tim Grover is?
No.
Tim Grover is the guy that trained Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and has trained since tons of high level athletes. And he's a very, very intense person. And I think you can appreciate this one of the messages he shares because he said he says like, I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a speaker that elevates you, because one of the things he hammers home so much is like, he's like, people will think like the road to winning. People think like there's 10 easy steps, quick, easy steps. He's like, man, don't you wish it was that easy? Yeah. And he says, he's like, people will call you crazy and you'll sit there your whole life thinking, am I insane? Like, why am I going through all this? Am I the only person that sees this? Am I being punked? And he says, whenever someone calls you crazy, tell them thank you, because that's the highest compliment they can give you.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I've been called crazy many times in many different contexts, sometimes good. I feel like it changes though. As you get older, people will say crazy. This is what I found, at least. People will say crazy in a good way. Kind of like they'll mean it in a good way. Like, you're crazy for doing X, Y, like dropping it, whatever. And I see that as positive. But when I was younger, if somebody said something crazy, it usually didn't mean something good, It's kind of like the try hard thing as well. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's a little bit older who says, wow, you try so hard, that's kind of like, that's good. That's a compliment. But in high school, it's usually meaning, oh, you're a fucking nerd and you're a loser. Don't talk to us.
Well, I mean, how the turntables in 10 years or 5 years or right? Like, I think it's such, again, entrepreneurship is obviously not a cakewalk. It's not easy. And I get told it all the time. And I still don't always wholeheartedly believe it, because I think when you're programmed to think in a certain way, it's very difficult to break out of it until you receive enough influence from people who think the same way. I think that's probably one of the hardest obstacles for people to break, is when you've been raised and conditioned in the grow up, be barefoot and pregnant and have X number of kids and live just outside the town, or move to the city and that's your big success and whatever. If we're talking about Winnipeg, right? Or if we're talking about another city, like breaking out of that conditioning and changing your environment, I think is one of the hardest things. Yeah. And also one of the most necessary things for people to do, especially if they're in entrepreneurship, because most of the people around them, as far as it stands, probably aren't like that right now.
Yeah. And the hardest decision is deciding to let go of certain people in your life and finding other ones who have the same goals as you, because you're an equivalent of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. So if you're hanging out with not so great people who aren't very motivated, who just kind of do the status quo, maybe whatever, that's not going to bode well for you. And it takes time to also recognize that and want to change. And then you have to actually change, because there are a lot of people who want to change. And there's a lot of people who want to get out of that situation. Like you're saying, people who switch jobs and get fired and they're like, oh, this is so shitty. Like 90% of those people could probably go off on their own and start it themselves to some extent, right? Starting a business is easy. Scaling a business is hard. That's what anyone can start a business. It is easy to start a business, but to actually be consistent with a business and grow it is very hard. Yeah, but nobody does it.
No, that's big facts. Like to get something started, a mom and pop. And I think that's one of the biggest objections I've heard too from people when they have a creative venture or they have some creative element and they're like, oh, but how am I going to scale this? And it's like, well, you don't know what you don't know. So like, go figure it out or go ask somebody, because when you like, I will always look at an example of something like Doug the Pug on Instagram. I remember watching an episode of Dragon's Den as a kid.
Okay.
And this is why Kevin O'Leary became my favorite dragon.
I'm going to search up Doug the Pug real quick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good. So Kevin O'Leary was talking to this woman who's like, I want to sell a book, or she's pitching a book about a pug named Wrinkles. And she's like, I'm going to create a book, a storybook that I'm going to sell. Yes, Doug the Pug. She was, and this woman is not the person who started Doug the Pug, but just it's a similar example. She was like, I want to create a storybook around Doug the Pug and sell it. And then she had the pug there on stage, and Kevin O'Leary was like, he's like, what the hell are you going to, why am I going to invest in this for? He's like, he's going to be dead in 12 years anyways. And then she was like, like covering the dog's ears. And he literally said these exact words. He's like, I would rather be run over by a truck with hot needles shoved in my eyes than ever invest in this. And like, just hooked her to death.
No
and I
way.
remember finding it so funny, but then years later, seeing something like a Doug the Pug, or people who grow social media accounts for animals that have a finite life, 1/8 of a human being at max. And I'm like, oh, so it's not impossible to grow this, or it's not always a dumb investment, but you have to figure out the path and test and fail in order for you to figure out how to make it work, or if it even is possible to work.
Yeah. Too many people are hard to fail. Too many people are afraid to fail. That's a huge roadblock for everybody, because you're told that you have to be successful. And if you start something and you fail, not good. That's funny. I need to look more into that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's so crazy. Like, because I remember that I've seen even the owner of Doug the Pug post about like, how do I respond to negative comments, or when people say Doug's going to croak in 3 years? Like, because let's all be honest, like he's been at it for like 6-7 years. Like he's got 6 years left in the tank, like tops. Like we will, by 2030, like Doug the Pug will be ancient history, you know, like, but the reality is the woman who owns him is very entrepreneurial and figured out a way to make it profitable, to make it a business. And even if he dies, and even if the business falls apart completely after, she's definitely made enough money to be comfortable for the rest of her life, because of an animal that has problems with breathing inherently because of inbreeding over a century. Like, think about how crazy that is.
She'll probably get a duplicate of it and just keep it going.
I mean, you could, like, I know that that Nicholas and I've joked about, like, you know, these raccoon accounts we followed on Instagram, and like what happens when they die. And literally one of them died recently. It's like, well, they get a second one, or people love them so much that they just are endeared by their story and follow. Then the person becomes the niche and everyone follows what they do. So either way, either way, you're going to figure it out. Right.
Is Nicholas going to get a raccoon?
Well,
anytime?
Well, maybe when the green card to America comes in, then I know he'll get one, because I don't think they're legal to own, even though Toronto is like the raccoon capital of the world, apparently. So he definitely chose the right place to live, if that's what if that's what he's one of his goals is. So
exactly. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Well, before we wrap up on today's episode, I did want to ask you, if you were to, I mean, you're obviously still in your 20s, but if you were to give advice to people who are in their 20s, any advice based on the greatest piece of wisdom or lessons or whatever that you've received, what advice would you give to people in their 20s who are trying to navigate an unconventional or unorthodox path in their life?
I'll give some advice about age, because I think that ageism is one thing that I've kind of dealt with a lot recently, especially as like a young woman in business going to conferences. I get asked my age on Zoom calls all the time, like more than you'd expect. Like I'll get on with calls and people will straight up ask, what's your age? Usually people ask after the deal's closed, but they don't care. Like your age doesn't matter. As long as you have the passion for something, you actually go toward it and you figure out a way to do it well, then people will respect you. And a large part of it is the way that you speak. Like you have to be very well spoken. You got to put yourself together really well, because if you're, I'm in my young 20s, I'm 22. So if you're in your 20s, people won't necessarily take you as serious as you hope. I've dealt with this a lot, but it's the way that you present yourself and the way that you speak, and you have to change their minds with your knowledge.
Amen. I love it. That's very true. And I think it is a resounding message that needs to be bellowed from the hilltops, because it goes back to what we're talking about. People see someone who, and it happens in the reverse, where they see someone at university who's 35 and like, oh, like this person's life probably collapsed, or why are they wasting their time? Or for my friends who are in med school, like one of my buddies told me that there was a guy who got in a few years ago in one of his classes that was like failed to get into med school 10 years in a row. 10,
Wow.
and was like in his early 30s just starting med school. And it's like, you
That's
look at that and
impressive. Like that, he just kept going.
you'd want to laugh or say something, but like, I mean, he got in.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. So I love it. It's a true point that needs to be shared. And Maddie, I super appreciate the time you had to come on and chat today. This was a lot of fun. I love how much you keep it 1,000, and don't shy away from telling the truth, because that is one thing.
Why would I be fake?
I mean, because why would you be? But people are, right? Even in entrepreneurship. Yeah. But I think that's again, to quote Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary, my favorite thing that he's ever said. He's like, my goal in life is to be the merchant of truth. Mm-hmm. And I was like, amen. Like, telling the truth is it'll set you free, Yeah,
I love that. Good quote. I like Kevin O'Leary. Yeah, thank you for having me on.